Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Gretchen and today I am here with another Booker Prize Longlist review, and today's title is Flashlight by Susan Choi. Now going into this book, I had never read anything else by Susan Choi. It looks like she has a pretty extensive backlist, but I really didn't know what to expect as far as writing style goes, or whether or not she likes to write about common themes in her books or not. So I really did go into this without a whole lot of expectations. What I did know was that it was a fairly long book. It was one of the chunkers on this year's long list. And also, anytime I see a book that has a lot of pages, I think of it as it's going to be a book that is likely filled with both plot and character development. The more real estate that the author has, I feel like the more time that they have to do both of those things. And I would say that I think that this was a pretty accurate assumption on my part when it came to this book. This book also, when I compare it to the other books on the long list, by far, it has been the most complicated and complex novel that I have read so far. It is multi-layered, there are lots of characters, there are time shifts and time jumps, and there's also a lot of historical elements to this book as well. So if you're a reader that likes to skim through books, this is one you're probably going to want to slow down and take your time with, because you do have to pay attention. The author is constantly giving you hints and little nuggets of information that are going to be important later in the book, so you really do have to take your time. And also, because of those historical elements, she's also trying to teach you some things along the way. So there were often times where I would do little tangents on my own to further dig into some of the components or historical pieces that she was telling me that I was maybe more unfamiliar with. Now, as far as the book goes, as I mentioned, there is a large cast of characters, but there's four primarily that we are dealing with. And the book starts with a tragic event involving some of the characters. So basically, we have a family. We have Cirque and Anne, they're married, and then they have a young daughter named Louisa. And then we also have another side character named Tobias, and Tobias is the son of Anne, but he was not a part of her relationship with Cirque. She had this pregnancy much younger in life, and she gave the child up. So he is not really a part of a lot of the narrative that we have between Louisa and her parents. So the tragic event that happens is basically one day Cirque and Louisa are out, they're walking along the beach, and they end up in the water, and Cirque ends up disappearing and Louisa ends up washing up on the shore, and she is rescued. No one ever hears from Cirque again. He is presumed dead, and of course that leaves Louisa and Anne together. So Anne is left with this young child. I believe she's 8 at the time, maybe. I may be wrong about that, but she's still young, and a good part of the book is about that mother-daughter dynamic that they have together. Not only leading up to the incident, but also how that relationship is strained further into Louisa's childhood and beyond, because now they have this tragedy that was looming over their heads. So another couple things to mention too about this book is I mentioned that there are a lot of historical elements. So one thing to know is that Sir, he is Korean, but he was born and raised in Japan. And then at some point in time, his parents were won over by a lot of the promises that North Korea was making, because they were looking for a better life at that point in time. And his parents felt like they could leave Japan and go back to North Korea, or go to North Korea and have more of the life that they were seeking. So his parents did return, and then, Sirk is at this point now where he is going to be going off on his own to get educated and ultimately start this family of his own. So here you have Sirk that, and this is a theme that I have seen in a couple of the Booker novels, where you have a character that is displaced from home or really trying to find his physical place in the world. He is maybe born somewhere different, but he feels more at home, or his heart is in a different place, or his family is in a different place than he is. And you have those logistical distances between each other and how that could, fracture relationships and things like that. So there was a lot of talk and narrative spent on that inner struggle that Sirk had between him being in Japan and his parents being in or going back to North Korea, and that relationship and how strained it became. Now, another component of this is obviously, Sirk's disappearance. So this is going to be a tragedy for the family, Anne and Louisa. But then we also have the introduction of her son back into the picture that she had given up years ago. And we do have now Tobias as a character in the book, and there are other things that come about from that relationship. Now, I don't want to give much more about the plot away from there. I think that this book has a lot going on with plot, and if I start to talk too much about it, I'm probably going to give away spoilers and things like that, and I certainly don't want to do that. But what I will say is that this book follows those characters from that incident that happened. So obviously we do learn about Sirk and Anne's early days, when they were young, and then ultimately to them getting together and meeting and marrying. And then of course, once that incident happened, or that accident happened, we do then follow that relationship between Anne and Louisa. Now, it's also important to note that Anne and Sirk did not have the most stable relationship. There was a lot of, it was contentious at times. And of course, if you're in a relationship that is maybe contentious and then something bad happens to the other person, that could be a very traumatic experience for the other person involved in that relationship. And there might be feelings of guilt and, whatever associated with that. So this book dealt with a lot of emotions and that character study for each of them, on how each of them was dealing with the repercussions of that event, and how that impacted not only their relationship with each other, but their relationships with other people that were in their lives, and how it really molded them into the people that they eventually became. Now, the novel follows them throughout their lives. So we follow Louisa from a young age, eventually into her high school days, her college days, and then her adult life. And the same with Anne. We learn more about her life after Sirk, and then of course there is Tobias that we learn about as well. So there is so much going on with this book, which I will say, although I did enjoy the story and I enjoyed my time with it for the most part, I do think that this book could have done with an edit. I feel like it was way longer than it needed to be, and there were a lot of parts that could have maybe been pared down. And I want to tell you specifically an example of what I think could have been removed, but it would give away a major plot point, and I don't want to do that or spoil it for you. But just know that my feeling is that I do think that there were a lot of things within this book that could have been shortened to maybe reduce the length of it, because although I think that the story was well done and the writing was great, I did get a little bored along the way, and it did drag out, I feel, a little more than it should have. And unfortunately, that did reduce my enjoyment of the book a little. I will be fully transparent and say that I maybe thought that it was a little drawn out, because when the Booker Longlist is announced, we all have 13 books. Well, those of us that like to read the whole long list, we are given 13 books, and we want to get through them so that we can get our reviews done and that we can get them read by the time the shortlist is announced, so that we can predict what the shortlist will be and talk about our personal shortlist, etc. And that could have potentially factored into why I felt that this book was dragging a little bit, because it was a longer read. I had to slow it down because there was a lot of information being given to us, and it was taking me longer than I wanted it to. And there were other books that I was excited to get to. So that very well could be why I felt that this book was dragging out. However, I will also say that this is a complaint that I heard from other readers as well, and I honestly do think that there were parts of this book that could have been pared down to make the pacing of this book a little faster, and it could have been done without sacrificing the plot or content. Another thing that I will say is, even though this book provided plot and it provided characters, I didn't emotionally connect up until the very end. I will say my favorite part of this book was the last chapter, and how the book was brought together and all of the characters were brought together at the very end. I think that for as much as I kind of slogged through this book at times, the ending really made up for it, and the author was able to tie it up nicely with a bow, and I was satisfied with the ending. There are so many times where I will read a long, complicated, or complex book and get to the end and it wasn't worth it because I wasn't satisfied with the ending. But for all of the seeds that Choi planted along the way, when I finally did get to the end, it delivered. So that was something that made me happy, and I feel like if I did get to the end and it was a vague ending or there was a lot of ambiguity behind it, I would have felt differently about the book in general. So yeah, although once again, this wasn't a favorite read of mine of the year, I definitely see the merit of this book. I can completely understand why this book made it on to the long list, and I could very much see this one advancing to the short list. So we will see what happens. And I'm also curious to read more from this author. I know that this author has had a lot of acclaim. I think that I can't remember the name of the book, but I think that she was also longlisted for the National Book Award, maybe even shortlist or won. I'm sorry, I don't know that off the top of my head, but the bottom line is that she does have critical acclaim and has history with prestigious book awards. So I would like to go back and read some of her other books. If you have read other books from Susan Choi and have any recommendations on where I should start with her backlist, I would love to know that. I also hope that your Booker journey is still going well. If you read this book, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And until we read again, bye!